All right, Bible study again, Leviticus Bible study. I'm glad that you're all here, my Leviticus Bible study people, my home quarantined people. Hopefully we're able to get home back to church soon, and we're able to do some Bible study. If not Bible study, at least divine service. Goodness, we hope, Lord. Um, okay, we're gonna actually get into Leviticus. So if you got your Bibles, we're actually going to dive into it, which is surprising because this is the fourth Bible study, and now we're finally gonna get into it. But we're only going to read two verses, so don't get too excited. All right. Anyways, I'll go ahead and read it. Leviticus chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. That's what we're going to be at here. Oh yeah, you get to see my gray clerical. That doesn't come out too often. Because I don't like it. But I got nobody in front of me to make fun of me. So there you go. All right, Leviticus chapter 1, verses 1 through 2. The Lord called Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, Speak to the people of Israel, and say to them, When any one of you brings an offering to the Lord, you shall bring your offering of livestock from the herd or from the flock. There you go. This is the word of the Lord. What can we talk about for 20 minutes, 25 minutes on those two verses? Quite a bit, actually, because, again, this is the setting up the beginning of this book of Leviticus. So we talked about last time how in the first 7 chapters we're going to see a lot of different offerings that are being set up, the burnt offering, the grain offering, an offering for sin, an offering for this and that, and all of that. So now we're going to start and get into the specific offerings, get into the specific sacrifices that are going to be made here. And so these first two verses kind of set everything up. When you bring an offering, and it's an offering of livestock. So this is going to be kind of across the board. Any offering that's going to be an offering of livestock. Now this may be a sin offering or a burnt offering, or whatever the case may be. But when it's of livestock, it's going to be of the herd or it's going to be of the flock. Grain offering is going to be different. We'll get into that in chapter 2. But for livestock, herd or flock. That's important. We'll get into that in a little bit. So, all right, let's get the context here. The context is the Lord is present. The Lord is present with his people. The Lord is present specifically with Moses, but remember, Moses is a representative of the people. He is the servant of his people. So he's the mouthpiece that God is actually using. So the Lord summons Moses here, much like the Lord had summoned Moses in other times as well. Most recently, when and where did he summon him? He summoned him on Mount Sinai, right? And come on up and we're going to have a 40-day chat. So that was the most recent summoning that we've at least heard of, right? Now, although it is true, and we've spoken about this in other Bible studies before, although it is true that the Lord is everywhere, right? He's got an omnipresence about him. That's one of the things, if you remember in catechism class, going through some of the aspects of who God is, how he differs from us, right? We've got the omnis, we have the omnipresent, right? The omniscient, the all everywhere, the all knowing, right? And so this is one of them. Yes, he's omnipresent. God is everywhere. And yet that's not very comforting, right? So God is so big that he is everywhere in creation. Great. He's here with me in this room. That's good, but it's not all that comforting, right? It's kind of like when Jesus says at the end of Matthew, right? Matthew 28, he does that great commission and he sends out his apostles. And he says, Lo, I will be with you always to the very end of the age. Well, what is Jesus saying there? It's not just this omnipresence sort of thing. Because if that were the case, well then, goodness, it's always been that way, right? Jesus could have said, hey, I've always been with you, and I always will be with you to the very end of the age. Omnipresence. I'm God, right? But that wasn't it. That's not what he was speaking about, remember? Because that Great Commission is go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, teaching them all that I have commanded you, and lo, I am with you always to the very end of the age. Some commentators, and I think it's right, the way to take a look at that is we've got the word and sacraments there, right? Go therefore and make disciples of all nations. How do you make disciples of all nations? Baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and teaching them the word, so baptism and the word, teaching them all that I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always to the very end of the age. That's the way that God is with us. And Jesus, Emmanuel, he is with us this day in word and sacrament. So it's going to be baptism, word, Lord's Supper, right? Well, it's the same sort of thing here. God's everywhereness doesn't do us any good, and it's not comforting whatsoever. The omnipresence isn't a comfort. So God actually places himself somewhere. Before, it was in that pillar of fire, and it was on, or the pillar of cloud, right? And it was on Mount Sinai. It covered Mount Sinai, and it was a terrifying thing. Right? The people couldn't go on there. God actually said if any person or animal, I believe it was, touches the foot of this mountain, they'll immediately die because my presence is here. That's the sinful fallen world. And yet he allowed Moses to go up. He called Moses up there. Well, God is no longer at Mount Sinai. He's going to have his people, at this point, I'm going to take you to the promised land. Now, of course, God knows, because he knows everything. He knows the future, that there's going to be a 40-year detour in that. But Moses didn't know that yet. The people didn't know that yet. So if God is going to move them from Mount Sinai over to the promised land, and he's promised to be their God and be with them, then he's got to actually locate himself as well. So we've got this traveling temple, this tabernacle, this tent of meeting thing. So God places himself in the tabernacle or the tent of meeting. When you hear tent of meeting or you hear tabernacle, it's the same sort of thing. We're going to get into that too a little bit. But if you hear tent of meeting, just think tabernacle. Okay. So God removes himself from the pillar of cloud on Mount Sinai, locates himself in the tent of meeting, specifically locates himself in the Holy of Holies, specifically locates himself on the mercy seat, which is on the Ark of the Covenant, which is in the Holy of Holies, right? That's where the cloud, his cloud is going to be there in the Holy of Holies. He's going to be on that mercy seat. So he does this so that the people might know where to go to gain access to God and receive his blessings. It's the same thing that's happened before, and it's the same thing that happens even today. God actually locates himself in a very specific place and says, I'm going to be there. You don't have to look for me out there. Right? You don't have to look for me in nature. You don't have to look for me in the babbling brooks or any of those sorts of things, or in the breaking of the clouds, and you see the beautiful rays of the sun coming through, and then that's how you know that God is with you. Nope. You know how God is with you? Word and sacrament, because he promised, right? He's tied himself to those things and placed himself there. Well, in much the same way, that's what he did with the tabernacle. He tied himself to the tabernacle and said, okay, I'm going to be with you, and here I am. And because I'm here, I'm not just here to make things scary. I'm here to actually give my gifts to you. I'm here to make you holy. We talked about that a couple times ago. I'm here to do this stuff for you, to make you holy, to sanctify you. That's who I am. So the Lord does that. He locates himself, right? Where do you want to, or where do you need to go to be with God? You go to the tabernacle. Now, it's also interesting, and we see this doesn't seem like a big deal, but it is. The tabernacle, the furnishings, the priests, the priestly garments, all of those things, they have been made, right? And I believe God has actually set aside and said, well, these are the people who are going to be the priests. And then at the end of Exodus, we've got the tabernacle actually being constructed. We've got the furnishings being made. We've got the priests' robes and everything being made. And yet none of those have actually been set up yet. None of those things have actually been anointed to be used in here, right? And the sacrificial system, think about this too. The sacrificial system hasn't even been set up. It hasn't even been inaugurated yet. That's what we're going to hear in Leviticus, right? That's actually what we're going to see in Leviticus, this 29 some odd chapter book of the sacrificial system. God is starting that for his people. So that hasn't even been inaugurated yet. And the priest's stuff and the furnishings haven't even been anointed. The tabernacle hasn't, we would probably say today, hasn't even been dedicated yet. And God locates himself there. This is where he is when he's speaking to Moses. He locates himself in that tabernacle before all of that stuff is even going on, which says something, right? It shows that God locates himself. God is the one who says, I'm going to be there. As opposed to God is forced to be put inside some box by us. Or he's lured there because of all the good and great things that we've done. And that's not how God works. God says, nope, I'm going to be here. And I'm going to be here for you. So you know, if you come here, that's where I am. He does that in the tabernacle. That's what the tabernacle is there for. All right. So let's get a little bit of the content of what's going on here. The content is the Lord summons and he calls Moses. This is what he's doing here. And this sort of language, this is the language of divine service, right? This is language of commissioning, actually. So he's calling, not just, hey, Moses, come on, but this divine call sort of thing, right? It's a commissioning. I'm setting up Moses. Moses, now you are going to do these things for the tabernacle, at the tabernacle, or have the things done at the tabernacle for the good of the people. Here we go. Let's get this rolling, right? So Moses is about to issue in a new aspect of the divine service, which has been going on. The divine service has been going on since time began, but now we've got this new aspect of it because of the tabernacle. And in reference to Moses, we only hear God called Moses, right? The ESV puts it what? Yeah, the Lord called Moses. We only hear that 4 total times. Now, this is one of them. The other 3 are all when Moses is on Mount Sinai. So you can kind of look up these yourself. I think I got the references right. Exodus chapter 3, verse 4. And the reference there is God calls Moses and then basically says that he's going to reveal his holy name through Moses to the people. Basically, he's going to put his name on the people, his holy name. Exodus 19:3, again, he calls Moses, and then he announces that he's going to make all of Israel a priestly people, a holy nation. Okay. Exodus 24, verse 16, God calls Moses and initiates the building of the tabernacle, initiates the priesthood, and kind of says, hey, this sacrificial system is going to start, and pretty soon I'm actually going to lay everything out for you. But hey, get to work building the tabernacle, building the furnishing, building the priestly robes and all of this. So we see that this is, when the Lord calls Moses, something important is happening. Something important is going to go on. Also, from this moment on, God will speak with Moses from the tent of meeting, from the tabernacle. That's what he's going to do. And it's called the tent of meeting, obviously, for 2 reasons. This is where God meets with Moses, and he gives him the laws and the directives, the rites and the rituals for all of these offerings that are going to be sacrificed at this tabernacle. It's the sacred place, right, where the offerings are brought before the Lord. And the laws are given at that place where the offerings are to be brought. So it's a tent of meeting because we get to see that God is speaking with his mouthpiece, with Moses here, and meets with him there. Before he met with him on Mount Sinai, no longer, now it's in this place, which is, again, it's a comforting thing because on Mount Sinai, that was a terrifying thing. But it's strange when they're moving, they have no place to really point to know where God's at. here they can, for the rest of their wanderings, they can do this. They can say, nope, God is there. He's in that tabernacle for us. It's a wonderful, comforting thing, right? But the tent of meeting is also not just a place for individual priests only to encounter God, but it's for a place for the whole assembly to encounter God. So the entire tabernacle could be heard and understood of as the tent of meeting, right? So in reference to the entire nation of Israel, it's the entire tabernacle is the tent of meeting, and it's for the people. We're going to see this over and over, and more importantly, that God initiating all of this stuff is for the good of the people, not for the good of a priestly class of people who are better than the ordinary Joes. That's not what God is setting up here. Okay. There should be an attachment as well, and some of you have Bibles that have probably a much better attachment and outline of the tabernacle than the one that I'm giving to you. But if you don't, hopefully you can download or at least look at that attachment there and see the tabernacle there. And you'll notice something, that everything is symmetrical in this tabernacle, right? So it's 50 cubits, and cubit is just 18 inches, give or take. That's what we would say, right? So it's 50 cubits by 100 cubits. It's a rectangle, but within that rectangle, every single thing is symmetrical. Now, the outline that I gave you there is a little bit off. The left half, the inner court side, I couldn't get my computer to do the boxes correctly. You'll notice with the outer court, the altar of burnt offering is smack dab right in the middle of all of it, right? From left, right, up, down, diagonal, and smack dab right in the middle. On the inner court side, that should be the same thing with the Ark of the Covenant, right? The Ark of the Covenant should be right there, smack dab in the middle, up, down, left, right, diagonal. That's where the exact center should be. But that's where, so you can see, that's where the Holy of Holies is. So the tabernacle itself, 100 cubits by 50 cubits, that's kind of this tent that's set up all the way around, right? But it's kind of like an open air sort of tent that's set up all the way around. And then the tent itself, which has got, the covering, which has got the ceiling and all of that, that's a lot smaller there. That's for the holy place and the Holy of Holies. And I believe that's going to be 10 cubits wide by 30 cubits long. And then the Holy of Holies is very symmetrical as well. The Holy of Holies is going to be 10 by 10, which means the holy place is going to be 10 by 20. I hope all this is kind of making sense there. But you do have, again, you can see this holy place versus the Holy of Holies. And all of that is within the tent of meeting. So when we're speaking about Moses, and so God is speaking with Moses at the tent of meeting, there's a very good chance that where God is actually speaking with Moses is right there at the altar of incense. So if you have that outline in front of you or up on your computer, you can see what the altar of incense is. The altar of incense is it's in the holy place, right in front of the Holy of Holies. So there's this curtain that separates the holy place from the Holy of Holies. And God is residing on the mercy seat on the ark in the Holy of Holies, right behind this curtain. And so Moses is right there in front of the altar of incense. And that is where he is speaking with God. So God speaks with Moses right there from the Ark of the Covenant at the altar of incense. And so you'll see a very important altar of incense right there. And then also there's a very important altar of burnt offering outside in the outer court. And what's important about that is not just that this is the place where the sacrifice actually happens, sacrifice of animals, and then the burning of the sacrifice as well. That's all well and good, and that's all very important. But more importantly, the way that we should see this is that where God is meeting Moses inside the tent before the altar of incense, in front of that curtain of the Holy of Holies, and he speaks with them there. God meets with the assembly of Israel right there at the altar of burnt offering. That's where he meets with his people. Now, yes, the whole nation of Israel can't cram into that outer court, but whenever there is an individual of Israel, whenever there's an Israelite there at that altar of burnt offering, he is communing with, he is actually meeting with his people. So that one person, that 100 people, that whatever the case may be, who's there, they are standing in the place of all of Israel, and so Yahweh allows that. And what's important is that place of altar of burnt offering is open to any Israelite. We'll go through the cleanliness rituals that you have to go through in order to be there, but any Israelite can go there. So nobody's above and beyond anybody else as far as the outer court and the altar of burnt offering there. But God is sure to speak with the Israelites. That's what he wants to do. That's what he wants to make sure is happening. He is speaking with his people, right? So God's interaction, his worship, the way he is actually setting up his worship of himself, it's centered on the people and not the clergy. And this is so very important for us to understand, right? Even though God has set up this clergy class, this priestly class of the Levites, and then the sons of Aaron are the priests, to perform the sacrificial rituals, the priests aren't intrinsically better or more important than the people. They did this work because they were set aside to do this work only because there needed to be people who were set aside to do this work. So therefore, they're there not so much for the service of God, but for the service of God's people. Because all of those sacrifices are for the good of the people. Remember that. So people bring these sacrifices so that God can forgive their sins. It's all about the forgiveness of sins. So the priests are actually doing this in service for the people, not in service for God so much. The whole sacrificial system is for the people. The priests are just who administers it. That's it. That's the only difference about the priests. They are set aside to administer the sacrificial system, but it's for the people. And this is completely different than all of the cults, the pagan cults that surrounded the Israelites. Not just at this time, but later in the Promised Land, later on with the Babylonians or the Assyrians or the Syrians or the Samaritans or whatever the case may be. All of these pagan cults had a different understanding of the priestly class, a different understanding of that, right? The priestly class was more important. The priestly class was better. And they had this direct access to God that nobody else had, and it was believed that they were better people because of that. And the sacrifices then and all the work that was done was in service to God, right? And we speak of this, right? We do things in service to God, but we do things in service to God. The way that we serve God, the way that the Israelites serve God, the way that we Christians serve God is by serving our neighbor. That was the whole Martin Luther thing, right? He couldn't understand why a monk reading the Psalms 5 times a day was service to God. It's good, don't get me wrong, to read the Psalms. It's good to be in God's Word, but they had turned it into this, no, if I do these 5 things, if I read the Psalms 5 times a day and pray the Psalms 5 times a day, then I'm actually serving God. It's not how it works. We always screw things up. That's what the sinner does as well. Also, so not only was this this priestly group, right, for the people, and so the entire worship of God is centered for the service of the people. Not only is that different than all the pagan cults, but that's also different than what it had morphed into in the New Testament too, right? If you remember that. By the time the New Testament comes around, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the high priests, the scribes, all of them have set themselves up into a clergy class that's above and more important than everybody else. And so the things that they do are no longer for the good of the people, but it's it's seen as this pompous, I'm better than the people sort of thing. Look how good I am. And again, that's what we always screwed up. And we screwed up also in today's religion too. I don't want to point the finger and make fun of Roman Catholics or anything like that, but you can see this in Roman Catholicism as well, where you've got this hierarchical system of pope, cardinals, bishops, right, or archbishops, bishops, um, and priests. And I'm sure there's many, many more. But as you climb that ladder, you get more and more important. As you climb that ladder, you get closer and closer to God. And within the Roman Catholic Church, priests are seen as almost better, as almost holier. I wear a clerical, and sometimes I get confused with a priest if I'm going to the hospital or whatever the case may be. And I have that there's that intrinsic kind of belief as well. Oh, here's a priest. He's a holy man. He's set aside. He's much better. He's better than me, obviously. It's all a bunch of hogwash, right? And Lutherans, at least our doctrine, hopefully should understand this best as well. And we're just taking this from the Israelites. We're just taking this from the way that God has actually set it up, right? Because the high priest back with the book of Leviticus and the priests, they're just the first servants. They're the first servants. They're serving their neighbor. Well, that's what a pastor should be. A pastor should only view himself as a servant, and the parishioners should should view their pastor as that way as well. Not that he's better than, not that his prayers have a more direct access to God, not that he's holier, but that he is set into an office to serve the people through word and sacrament ministry. That's what the pastor's there for. That's what the priests were there for, to administer the sacrificial system, right? All right. We're getting close to time. We're kind of going to wrap it up here. All right, so the twice daily sacrifices, the morning and evening sacrifices that take place, each Israelite household is to bring an animal from the herd or the flock. There we go. Now we get back finally to the text, the herd or the flock. What do we see here? We see that, again, they're not called to go out and get any wild animal. They're not called to find some exotic best animal that I'm going to sacrifice. I'm going to get a white rhino and sacrifice that to the Lord, because nobody's done that before. That, and we'll throw a couple giraffes on the barbecue as well, right? It's not what it's about. It's, hey, here are the animals that you have in your flocks and in your herds. That's what we're going to use. So it's, again, for the people. They don't have to go out getting anything that they don't have. But also, and I think one could say, and I think appropriately so, the fact that it is their flock and is their livestock, right? It's not some wild game that they found. It's not some wild beast that they found. It comes from their own herds. This is representative of the nation, of the people, right? So when you're bringing a lamb of your flock, that's representative of the people of Israel. So, the Lord kind of sets this up for very specific things, right? That, and a lot, not all, we'll see which ones aren't, but a lot of these sacrifices, again, they're edible. They're either eaten by the priests, because remember, they don't have land, they don't have herds themselves, so the things that they eat are the things that are sacrificed, brought before them. Or some of the sacrifices are actually eaten by the assembly of the people who come there. But you're not going to have a baboon as a sacrifice here. You're not going to have a donkey or a mule as a sacrifice. Those things aren't edible. Those things aren't good for the practical aspect of what a sacrifice is also going to do. So kind of just keep that in mind there. Okay, I told you every single time we're going to have a fulfillment by Christ. And so we're going to wrap it up with the fulfillment by Christ. How do these two first verses, how are they fulfilled by Christ? Again, we talked about the way in which the tent of meeting was where the glory of God resided, right? He veiled himself behind a curtain in a cloud on the mercy seat, right? In the new covenant, in the flesh and blood of the humanity of Jesus Christ, God now resides throughout eternity, right? So not only during that time, but after his ascension and unto eternity, God resides in this flesh and blood. So that's where God has located himself, in Jesus. And then Jesus locates himself in word and sacrament later on. But this is the same thing that happened at the tent of meeting. Yahweh located himself, the Holy of Holies. Here, Yahweh locates himself in the flesh and blood of Jesus, right? We get that in John chapter 1. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. We also get that in Colossians, right? Colossians chapter 1, verse 19. Let me get there in my Bible real quickly. Hopefully I can find it real quickly. Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians. All right. Colossians chapter 1, verse 9. And so, from the day we heard, we have not ceased to pray for you, asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will and all spiritual wisdom and understanding. I think I got the wrong one there. It's 19, sorry. 119. For in him being Jesus, all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. The fullness of God is dwelling in Jesus. Just like the fullness of God dwelt in the Holy of Holies in the tabernacle, now the fullness of God dwells in Jesus. What a beautiful thing. And again in chapter 2, verse 9, for in him, in Jesus, the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily. There is Jesus. So, there's some fulfillment, Jesus fulfilling there. Also, the people were to listen to Moses as the mouthpiece of God. In the same way, the people, if we want the real mouthpiece of God, we've got the Word incarnate. We've got Jesus Christ, right? Jesus is the true mouth of God, since he is the Word incarnate. And we see that also in Hebrews. Hebrews is a wonderful book that takes Leviticus and brings it into the New Testament. But Hebrews, it starts off this way, right? Hebrews 1 through 2. Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But now in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom he also created the world. All right. So, Moses was the mouthpiece of God for the people. Jesus is the mouthpiece of God for us and for our good. And the preaching of the gospel reveals Christ's divine glory. He is our place of worship. Where do you go? You go to Jesus. He's our tent of meeting. That's where we go. You want to find God? Go to Jesus. That's where you go. You don't go anywhere else. You go to Jesus. Because he's where God comes to us, at the place of sacrifice, right? He's where he makes himself present for our good. And so, I want to come to Jesus. I want to come to God. Go to Jesus. Where's Jesus? He's put himself in word and sacrament. That's why we go to church. That's why this kind of stinks so bad and it hurts not being able to meet together. We want to meet together, not just for the mutual consolation of the saints, but so that we can receive Jesus individually and communally. So, all right. Hopefully that worked. I'm over again. That's all right. See you guys later. The Lord bless and keep you. Bye.